Hello everyone, this is Jeffrey Booth for the Stories for My Lights YouTube channel, and I would like to welcome you back to Craig and the Magic Deck. Now if you recall in the last episode, Craig sat down on the throne or the pilot's chair and found himself within the machine. And he was also told that he would have to live the rest of his life inside of this virtual space where he would be helping guide the biggest human ship, also known as the planet Earth. Now we resume our adventures. Craig and the other pilots, including Mary, were holding the wheel steady and smooth with minimal disruption when suddenly the inside of their virtual space started flashing red, strobing in red, strobing out, strobing in, strobing out. They feel a trembling and the wheel jerks hard from their hands to the left. They're confused because they have all four of them. This virtual wheel should be somewhat easy for them to hold. Above the wheel, an alert from the AI shows up. It shows as floating letters that say, a Cranthian ship has been detected in Earth space. This warning appeared again and again and again. The Cranthian ships, so black they almost disappeared into the space around them, appeared in space around Earth and began immediately firing a beam at the planet. This beam didn't seem to do any damage. In fact, the AI, through a prompt warning message, told them that it was using both some sort of gravity beam to try to pull the planet out of orbit and also some sort of disruptor, which was likely to cause interference with the operation of the AI's neural core. They reasoned that this was probably why the AI was only sending them brief messages. Craig, Mary, and the other two pilots were struggling as hard as they could to keep the wheel under control. It would move right, and they would try to move it left, and they would move back and forth, and it was shaking wildly. And as it shook wildly, they could feel the planet shaking wildly around them. Up on the surface, meanwhile, around the world, there are earthquakes. A massive earthquake in Japan, Tokyo to be exact. Moscow, Russia, a massive earthquake. And in the United States, in San Francisco, a massive earthquake. But all around the world, there's smaller tremors. 3 more Cranthian ships arrive and start firing the same beams into the planet, and the Earth starts moving more. They lose complete control over the steering wheel. Craig is flung to the left. Mary gets knocked down. The other two try to grab it and stabilize it, but it spins rapidly out of their hands. The wheel is shaking violently, and the planet is also shaking violently. Up on the surface, there's more earthquakes, and buildings start to shake. They start to crumble, and even some of them start to tip over. On the surface, newspapers are broadcasting about this seemingly unprecedented earthquake that seemed to have encompassed the whole world. There were even reports of tidal waves and tsunamis from the violent shaking of the planet. Craig got up. He tried to wrestle control of the steering wheel. He stabilizes it a little, but barely, and the Earth shakes slightly less. It does not stop. He screams as loud as he can for Mary and for the other pilots, and they don't come. Once again, he gets lost in trying to hold the wheel as best as he can. He gets knocked off to the left, gets back up, stabilizes it for a few moments, gets pushed off to the left again, stabilizes it for a few moments, gets yanked to the right. He screams once again, "Mary, where are you?" He gets thrown off the wheel again, and instead of rushing back to it, he looks around. Mary and the other pilots are gone. He doesn't see their virtual avatars anywhere. "Help!" he yells. Suddenly, he hears the voice of the AI. It sounds distorted, crackling, like something is interfering with its signal. The other captains are gone. They've been slain by the Cranthians. They got into the dome. "Will you please, Craig, hold onto the wheel as long as you can? Have faith." Craig started breathing rapidly. "Cranthians in the dome? But they're gonna get me next!" But the AI was silent. So, as the AI asked, he holds onto the wheel as hard as he can. He tries to forget about the danger outside, and he instead focuses on how many people on the surface he will help if he can keep the Earth still and from shaking and quaking less. He holds on. He's fearful. He feels blind. He doesn't know what's happening, and nobody had ever taught him how to open his eyes and how to see the room outside, how to figure out what was happening. He also didn't know how to create the hologram that the AI had mentioned. He screams for the AI and asks it for help. "You're the only one holding this planet together, Craig," it says, in a voice even more crackly and distorted than before. "Please, do your best. Help is on the way." So Craig focuses. He calms down once more. He grabs the wheel. He holds it still for as long as he can. When it gets yanked out of his hands, he repeats the process. He focuses, and he struggles. This place feels timeless. He doesn't know if he had been wrestling with the wheel for a minute or for an hour. He was lost. Several times he screamed and he cursed, words that his parents would not have liked him to say. But he held on as best as he could, and surprisingly, he didn't wink out of existence. For some reason, the Cranthians had not yet assaulted his real body. Meanwhile, back in outer space, more Cranthian ships arrive in orbit, and the wheel is ripped completely out of his hands as they fire their gravity beam. He gets thrown, he somersaults, and he yells in fury. He tries to grab the wheel again, but it's spinning way too fast for him to get any sort of handhold. He screams and he cries and he asks for help. He tries to grab it again and again and again, but it keeps getting ripped forever out of his hands. It seems now as if there is nothing he could do. He sits down and he watches the wheel, and he hears the vibrations resounding through the planet. Somehow he can feel them both in his real body and in this virtual space. Suddenly, fading in next to him, his dad appears. His dad gives him a hand, pulls him up, and says, "Come on, Craig, we've got to do this." Craig is shocked. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "No time for that now, come." His dad runs over to the wheel and with his might starts trying to hold it still. Craig runs over too, and for a brief moment, the wheel is stabilized. But again, it gets ripped from both of their hands and the shaking intensifies. They try again and again, sometimes getting it to stop and causing the shaking and quaking to briefly abate. Then, his mother appears next to them. She grabs onto the wheel and helps them hold it even steadier. It still jerks this way and that, back and forth, trying fiercely to elude their grasp. But the shaking lessens. Just then, 2 more Cranthian ships appear in orbit and start firing their same beams. The wheel starts yanking back and forth and gets ripped out from all 3 of their hands. They get back up and they try to stabilize it and hold it in place. "You've got this, Craig," his mom yells. Craig's dad merely grunted, and Craig yelled, "We won't give up!" When suddenly, another man appeared next to them, grabbing onto the wheel, helping them steady it further. He recognized the man as his science teacher. With the help of his science teacher, the wheel isn't completely still, but it isn't vacillating back and forth nearly as rapidly as before. With the wheel somewhat still and the shaking abating, Craig asked his parents, "How did you get here? Why did you get here?" Well, Craig's dad told him a story. A creature had come to them. In the shape of a gnome, it had appeared to his father. In the shape of a rhinoceros, it had appeared to his mother. And it told them a story, a similar story to what Craig had known, that the world was in grave danger, that their help was needed, and that their son was in danger. And so they, of course, followed. Craig and his parents had both, of course, figured out that these were mere holograms from the AI who had been helping gather them and teach them and lead them to weapons. After his father had told the story, his mother said, "And you know the best part, Craig? We aren't alone. There's hundreds more coming. They have the swords and the armor, and they're gonna help us defend this room. Our friends, our family, people from our town. This creature, this entity led us here, and we are not gonna leave you alone." Craig felt himself smile for the first time in what felt like an eternity. His parents here, led here by the AI. Outside, apparently hundreds of reinforcements. Friends, family, village mates, all with the powerful swords and armor that Craig had had before he came into this world. He didn't want to think about what it meant that his parents were here with him. Their lives were over, but at least they were together. His celebration was cut short when 3 more Cranthian ships warped and immediately started firing their beams. The wheel was once again ripped from their hands. They're scattered about the room farther than they had ever been before. They rush back, but they cannot get control of the wheel. Craig grabs it. His wrist is yanked backwards and feels broken, though he knows he is in a virtual space. His science teacher gets flipped over, knocked to the ground, and seems to be dazed. His mother and father struggle with the wheel, but they're not able to regain control of it. The shaking is stronger than it's ever been. Up on the surface, across all major cities in the United States and around the world, skyscrapers are falling. Bridges are collapsing. Giant sinkholes are opening in the ground. Tidal waves are buffeting the shore. It's the largest disaster the world has ever seen. Craig thought that the Cranthians had perhaps just won the war that he had just found out about. He didn't know that they had been fighting this war for over a millennia. But the Cranthians had found the last and biggest ship that humanity had possessed, and they seemed to be taking control of it. Meanwhile, just outside with the bodies of Craig and his family sitting on their thrones, the Cranthian and human fighters who had been engaged in a pitched battle are falling to the ground. They cover their heads because rocks and debris, both of steel and stone, are falling from the ceiling. Their battle is temporarily over while they all simply struggle to survive. At times, a grainy black and white image of the outside battle appears above the steering wheel, as the AI has the resources to show it. But this too winks out. It seems as the battle is over. The shaking intensifies. Suddenly, a green message in English text appeared, floating in the air above the steering wheel, that simply said, "Fleet ship detected." It hovered above the wheel. Craig didn't know what it meant. He looked around at his mother and father and his science teacher. They simply shrugged. They had no idea what it meant. Was this a Cranthian fleet ship or something more, something less? He didn't know. But this message appeared again and again, until, by Craig's best count, it had happened 20 times. The wheel suddenly stopped shaking. Craig, his family, and his teacher rushed up, each grabbed onto the wheel where they could and got it under control. At long last, the wheel stabilized. It wasn't shaking, merely vibrating calmly back and forth. They got control of the ship. Up on the surface, the shaking stopped. In the dome, the shaking stopped. Meanwhile, up on the surface, those who were observant enough on the surface noticed something strange happening in the night sky. There were bright flashes of blue as fleet ships warped into orbit. And then there were large flashes as lasers and other types of weapons blasted into the Cranthian ships. The Cranthian ships turned about and started firing their own beams. Shields lit up, lasers flared, ships warped into battle, and those who were observing this saw a light show, the likes which they had never seen before and never would see again. The biggest battle ever between the Cranthians and the humans. One by one, both because they had the element of surprise and appeared to have superior weapons, the Cranthian ship disappeared into huge chunks of debris. Finally, the light show stopped, and all that remained were the human ships, gleaming softly in the sky like silver stars. At this very moment, on every screen across the planet, on every phone, every television, every tablet, every computer screen, every smartwatch, every screen appeared a face. It was a bald man in his 40s who had a gray beard. He had harsh features, both like he had been through some very challenging times and just from being fit and thin. He introduced himself as Captain Jonathan Sky, and he said, in his gruff voice, "People of Earth, welcome back to the Terran Federation. Welcome home." Craig and his family watched stunned. "What does this mean?" Craig asked. Just then, the AI appeared inside of the virtual space in the form of the gnome. It walked over to Craig. "I just want to thank you for all you've done," it said to him. And you, it said to his parents and to the science teacher. "Who is the Terran Federation?" asked Craig. The AI seemed to flicker for a moment and it looked at him. Unknown. No such entity had existed as far as our databases are concerned. It seems as if human forces have reorganized and re-emerged onto the galactic scene and are here to rescue us. We have run scans on all their ships, on all the life forms aboard, and we do find that based on their DNA, they are all human of origin. They are on our side. Their ships have powered down, and they are surrounding our planet to keep it safe. It seems as if we had at last found friends. Craig, his parents, and his science teacher kept holding the wheel. Meanwhile, outside in the control room, the humans, with their amazing armor and their swords that seemed to bestow upon them amazing gifts with martial arts, speed, prowess, and dexterity, had either captured or slain the remaining Cranthians. The control room was safe. The pilots were safe. Those who had helped clear the room were safe. It seemed as if Earth, the giant spaceship as it was safe. Craig, of course, wondered what this all meant. Who were these ships from? And if the Cranthians had been such a scourge that the humans had been hiding from for so long, how was it possible the human battleships had appeared in space and destroyed the Cranthian ships with seeming ease? He had so many questions. Their questions would soon be answered, at least to some degree. Captain Jonathan Sky was on a space shuttle heading for Earth, where he would talk to the world leaders and he would talk to the people of Earth about what came next. However, because of what had happened to Craig and his parents and his science teacher, these things no longer much concerned him. He was concerned with looking after the spaceship, the planet. So, in time, he learned how to hold the steering wheel. His parents learned how to hold the steering wheel. And once they got extremely good at this, they learned how to hold it still so they could think and do other things. And he realized that in the artificial intelligence core of this planet was a whole other world with virtual cities, virtual towns, virtual amusement parks. And believe it or not, the souls and spirits of thousands of people who had been pilots or had chosen to come into this world of their own volition. He would be lying if he said he wasn't happy that his parents had come to join him. For in this virtual space, they found themselves a calm home, and they lived happily ever after, at least as happily as could be. For you see, the road and the path ahead of the humans was not a simple path, nor an easy path. But at least he had his family with him, he had his friends with him, and he met new and interesting people inside of this world. But now that we know of Craig, his story, his heroics, and how if he hadn't arrived just when he did, the planet would have fallen to the Cranthians, we can move on to Captain Jonathan Sky. Perhaps we will find out who he is, what he wants, and what his adventures will be. That is the conclusion of the Craig and the Magic Deck saga. Alden, I hope you loved it. I want you to know I love you very much. You are my best friend, and I will always be there with you in my heart, even when we're not in the same room. Good night and sweet dreams.